It wasn't madness that destroyed them, it was clarity. That is the paradox Jung left us with. Most people do not collapse because they are weak, but because they see too much, too soon, without a framework to contain it. A dangerous discovery is not the absence of light, it is the sudden flood of it, unmediated, unintegrated, and overwhelming. And here lies the problem. You think you are navigating life freely, yet day after day you enter invisible environments, echo chambers, comparison arenas, silent suffering households that slowly rewire your psyche against you. You think you are merely compassionate, yet Jung showed that empaths often become prey for unconscious energy parasites who feed on their light until nothing remains. You imagine you are awakening, but Jung warned that awakening often kills motivation, stripping away every familiar desire until you feel empty, lost, and unmoored. These are not accidents. These are patterns, and they are far more dangerous than most people ever realize. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That is the hidden battlefield. What you call your personality, your choices, your relationships, may actually be the unconscious playing itself out through you. Without awareness, you are not living. You are being lived. Over the next hour, I am going to take you into 7 psychological environments Jung identified as lethal to the mind, along with the empath's breaking point, the paradox of awakening, and the terrifying red flags that he believed marked the most dangerous personalities. We will descend into the shadow basement where everything you fear in yourself is locked away, and we will climb into the rare air of differentiated consciousness, the level of mind reserved for the 5% Jung believed were the forerunners of human evolution. They see patterns no one else notices. They sense undercurrents no one else admits. They feel wounds no one else dares to carry. But here is the promise. If you can recognize these traps and learn Jung's escape protocol, you will not only protect your sanity, you will ignite capacities within you that most of the world calls impossible. Jung called it individuation, the alchemical process of becoming whole. Because the truth is this, the most dangerous discovery is not what destroys you. The most dangerous discovery is what forces you to choose between collapse into unconsciousness or conscious transformation. And today you will see exactly how that choice unfolds. Carl Jung observed that the most dangerous addictions are not to substances, but to psychological rewards invisible to the untrained eye. He warned that the empath's greatest intoxication comes not from what they receive, but from what they give. This is the healer high. The healer high is that electric rush you feel when someone broken tells you, "I don't know what I'd do without you." It is the warm flood of significance when your soothing words stop someone else's storm. It is the illusion of control in a chaotic world, purchased not through dominance, but through sacrifice. Jung wrote that every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. For empaths, the drug of choice is idealism, believing that if they just heal hard enough, give deep enough, absorb long enough, they will be safe. Why is it so addictive? Because it offers 3 hidden payoffs. Identity inflation. You become the rescuer, the indispensable one, the axis around which fragile lives rotate. For a moment, you feel larger than your wounds. Anxiety relief. By fixing others, you silence your own dread. The other's chaos becomes your distraction from your inner void. Intermittent gratification. Like any gambler, you play for irregular rewards. One day gratitude, the next indifference. The unpredictability locks you in deeper. But as Jung cautioned, every high creates its opposite. The brighter the persona, the darker the shadow. The very act of rescuing inflates a false self, while secretly burying resentment, unmet needs, and rage in the unconscious. The empath's glow on the outside masks an internal collapse. You believe you are curing others, but in truth, you are medicating yourself. You believe you are saving them, but you are sacrificing yourself to the healer high. and like all highs, it has suppliers. For every empath hooked on healing, there is a counterpart, someone who instinctively senses the drug you crave and doles out just enough crisis, just enough weakness, just enough need to keep you coming back. Jung called this dynamic the unconscious contract, a secret trade of energy no one signs, but both sides enforce. Because what is a high without a dealer? What is a rescuer without someone to rescue? This is why empaths again and again seem to attract the same draining personalities. It is not attraction, it is transaction. And it is here that we must turn to Jung's framework of persona and shadow, for it is through the mask that the contract begins, and through the shadow that it sinks its teeth. Jung taught us that the psyche is never simple. It is a theater of masks and exiles, and every role we play on the surface is balanced by what we repress underneath. He called the polished face we show to the world the persona, the mask of acceptability, the social passport that lets us survive in families, workplaces, and communities. For the empath, the persona often takes one radiant form, the helper, always available, always forgiving, always fine. This is the costume society applauds, but Jung warned that the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself and others think one is. In other words, the mask is not the truth, it is camouflage. Behind this golden mask festers the shadow, every unacceptable part of the self exiled into darkness. For the empath, the shadow contains their rage at being overlooked, their exhaustion at endless giving, their terror of being abandoned, and, most dangerous of all, their hunger to finally be cared for. Here emerges the birth of the exchange, because what happens when someone shows up needing rescue? The empath's persona is instantly validated. They are the savior, the healer, the essential one, but the price of wearing that mask is that the shadow is denied. The selfish need, the ungrateful anger, the unholy desire for reciprocity, all of it is buried. Jung discovered that this suppression does not disappear, it leaks. The shadow, unacknowledged, begins to operate the relationship from underground. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And so, the empath keeps finding themselves in lopsided dynamics, where the more they give, the more they are taken from. Because the persona and the shadow always dance as a pair. The brighter the mask of helper shines, the darker the unowned resentment grows. And predators, whether consciously or not, sense this imbalance. They detect the mask, they sense the denial, and they unconsciously step into the role of feeder. Thus, the empath's healer high is never an accident. It is the inevitable byproduct of a mask that cannot be removed without shattering. This is why Jung warned his students, never mistake a perfect mask for a healthy soul. The person who seems endlessly adaptable, endlessly kind, endlessly giving may be the very one standing on the edge of collapse. And so, the contract is written. The empath offers stability, attention, and emotional labor. The other offers crisis, need, and dependence. Both are hooked, one on giving, the other on taking. But this mask and shadow contract does not remain still, because if projection is the hook, then trauma bonding is the barb, and it is there we must go next. Why is it that empaths, those radiant souls who want nothing more than peace, so often become the banquet table for manipulators, narcissists, and emotional parasites? Jung would say, because unconscious wounds emit signals long before words do. Think of the empath as a lighthouse. Their over-apology, their quick smile to smooth tension, their habit of answering questions no one asked, all of these are beams in the night. And who comes sailing toward that light? Not the healed, but the hungry. Jung observed that projection is never random. We are always in the other's shadow, he wrote. Those who cannot face their chaos seek out someone willing to metabolize it. And the empath, trained since childhood to be the regulator, becomes the perfect host. Here is the mechanism: signal detection. Feeders scan unconsciously for boundary-light behavior. The empath who says it's no problem while dying inside, who forgives before an apology is spoken, who offers help without being asked. These are signals of availability. The projection hook. The feeder begins attributing their disowned qualities, rage, laziness, duplicity, to the empath. And the empath, wanting harmony, accepts the projection silently, as though it were true. The crisis pattern. Small dramas arise, always needing rescue, and each time the empath delivers. Gratitude is shown, briefly. Then, as with any addict, the feeder requires a larger dose next time. This is what Jung identified as the unconscious contract in action. It feels like attraction, even destiny, but it is really transaction. One brings the wound, the other brings the bandage. And perhaps you've noticed this in your own life. You sit in a room full of people, and somehow the most unstable one finds you. They lock eyes. Within minutes, their secrets spill out, their chaos floods the space, and you, against your own better judgment, begin soothing, counseling, absorbing. Why you? Because your nervous system, honed from childhood, broadcasts a single message: I can carry what you cannot. Jung warned that this pattern is not kindness, but compulsion. Where love rules, there is no will to power, he wrote, and where power predominates, love is lacking. The feeder senses not your strength, but your willingness to surrender power in the name of care. That surrender becomes their entry point. And so, the empath becomes surrounded not by equals, but by dependents, not because they are cursed, but because they are conditioned. But conditioning is only half the story. For once the projection takes hold, the real barb sets in, trauma bonding, the cycle of intensity mistaken for intimacy. And that is where we turn next. What most empaths call love is often nothing of the sort. It is not devotion. It is not connection. It is the trauma bond loop, one of the most deceptive psychological prisons Jung ever described. The loop begins with idealization. The feeder showers you with admiration. No one has ever understood me like you. In that glow, the empath feels finally seen, finally necessary. This is the bait. Then comes enmeshment. The boundaries blur. Your moods, your energy, your very identity begin to orbit the other's turbulence. You no longer ask, what do I feel? You ask, how are they today, and how can I stabilize them? But the loop inevitably collapses into devaluation. Gratitude withers. Criticism sharpens. You are accused of not doing enough, of being selfish, of failing the role you never should have been assigned. And here the empath makes the fatal error. They try harder. At this point, the cycle resets. There is a sudden apology, a tearful confession, a fragile embrace. For a moment, everything feels whole again. The empath breathes relief, confusing this intensity with intimacy. Jung warned that where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking. What the empath mistakes for devotion is in fact domination, wrapped in the language of need. Here lies the test. After giving, do you feel lighter or heavier? Does your soul expand or does it shrink? If you walk away from every loving act carrying more weight, you are not in love. You are in the trauma bond loop. Jung discovered that this loop has nothing to do with passion and everything to do with projection. The feeder projects their unresolved wounds into you, and you metabolize them as if they were your own. The loop sustains itself because each cycle delivers the healer high, the intoxicating illusion that you matter because you are indispensable to another's survival. But the price is steep. The longer you orbit in the loop, the more you abandon your own center. Soon your needs feel intrusive, your silence feels guilty, your no feels like violence. This is why Jung called trauma bonding one of the most insidious psychological mechanisms. It is slavery disguised as devotion. And now we must ask, If the bond feeds on your sacrifice, what exactly is being drained? The answer is your energy economy, and that is where we turn next. Jung warned that what destroys most people is not one great catastrophe, but the silent hemorrhage of psychic energy. Empaths, above all, are vulnerable to this depletion. They confuse vitality with virtue, exhaustion with love, and in doing so, they bankrupt themselves in a currency few ever measure. Let us call this the energy economy. Every relationship makes deposits and withdrawals. The healthy ones leave you balanced, sometimes even richer. The predatory ones leave you overdrawn, owing debts you never agreed to. There are 3 primary leaks Jung repeatedly documented. The time soak. The feeder's crises arrive always urgent, always unplanned. The empath cancels meals, deadlines, even rest. What seems like compassion is actually debt, hours stolen that will never return. Emotional labor without reciprocity. You become the therapist, the confessor, the regulator. But when your storm arrives, the room goes silent. Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." The empath gives voice to others' pain, but finds no voice for their own. Identity inflation and collapse. The healer high pumps you up with false significance. I am their savior. But the crash leaves you hollow when their gratitude fades. Your worth rises and falls on the stock market of another's dysfunction. The body knows before the mind does. The shallow breath, the tight chest, the dread before a call, these are invoices from your nervous system, warning that your energy economy is bleeding out. Jung observed this in his Zurich clinic. Patients who felt inexplicably fatigued, anxious, or fragmented were not diseased, but drained. Their vitality had been siphoned into the unconscious contracts they maintained. Because here is the brutal truth. Every empath trapped in the loop is not just giving care, they are funding someone else's survival with their own life force. And every currency spent this way is currency withheld from the one place it is most needed, your own growth, your own individuation, your own wholeness. But to plug the leaks, you must confront the very figure inside you that keeps signing these contracts, the inner rescuer, the child who first learned that safety meant saving others. And it is to this figure that we must now turn. Every empath carries within them a silent archetype Jung recognized, the inner rescuer. On the surface, this figure appears noble, always stepping forward, always patching wounds, always absorbing storms. But underneath, the rescuer is not driven by generosity. It is driven by fear. Where was it born? Almost always in childhood. Jung wrote that the child who is forced to stabilize the moods of parents, siblings, or caretakers develops an over-functional ego, an identity shaped not around play or freedom, but around vigilance. Instead of asking, "Am I safe?" the child learns to ask, "Are they calm, and what must I do to calm them?" This child becomes the thermostat of the household, regulating everyone else's temperature. And because the stakes are survival, avoiding abandonment, punishment, or chaos, the role fuses into identity. Jung warned that what begins as adaptation becomes destiny. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. The inner rescuer is therefore not a saint, but a shield. It protects the vulnerable inner child, the one who still longs to be cared for, to be chosen without performance, to be loved without labor. But because the rescuer has sworn an oath of silence, the child remains hidden, unheard, starved. This explains why empaths in adulthood are compelled to rescue others. They are not only saving friends, lovers, colleagues, they are reenacting the ancient bargain. If I can keep you stable, perhaps I will be safe. Each act of rescuing whispers back to the inner child, "See, we're still worthy. We still have a place." But here is the tragedy. The more the rescuer performs, the more invisible the child becomes. Rage is buried, needs are denied, longing is disguised as service, and the shadow grows heavier with each suppression. This is why Jung insisted that individuation requires not the perfection of the persona, but the retrieval of the abandoned child. Integration begins when you realize the rescuer is not your essence, it is your armor. The child it protects is not weak, it is your original core waiting to be acknowledged. Because the rescuer was born in a house of survival, changing it now feels like betrayal. To say no feels like violence. To stop absorbing feels like murder. But it is not betrayal, it is birth. And that is why the first step toward freedom is not aggression, but what I call nonviolent disengagement. The slow, deliberate withdrawal of the rescuer from contracts it never should have signed. And that method is what we must turn to next. Jung often reminded his students that freedom is not found in eruption, but in consciousness. When you finally see the pattern, the danger is to swing from one extreme to the other, from endless rescuing to scorched earth rejection. But individuation, he warned, requires patience, rhythm, and method. That is why I now lay before you the 5 stages of disengagement, a process designed to dissolve unconscious contracts without shattering your soul in the process. Stage 1. Awareness Audit. Before you can withdraw, you must see clearly. For 7 days, track your interactions. Write down each time you feel urgency, obligation, or subtle resentment. Do not edit. Do not excuse. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This journal becomes your mirror, revealing the relationships where your rescuer is most activated. Stage 2. Micro-boundaries. Empaths often imagine boundaries as dramatic ultimatums. But true withdrawal begins small. Instead of rushing to fix, respond with reflective mirrors. I trust you to handle this. Instead of endless availability, time box your presence. I have 10 minutes now. Let's focus on one step. These micro-boundaries are not walls. They are gentle levers that begin shifting the unconscious contract. Stage 3. Language upgrade. Most empaths betray themselves through speech. They apologize before declining. They justify their refusals. They explain their worth. To break the loop, strip language down to clarity. I can't take this on, but here's a resource. I'm available Friday at 2. That doesn't work for me. No excess words, no apologies. Jung said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another." Your language must fit you, not them. Stage 4. Tolerance building, the withdrawal. Here lies the crucible. The first time you do not rescue, anxiety spikes. You feel cruel. You feel selfish. This is the rescuer's withdrawal, the inner child's panic. Breathe through it. Practice exhale-dominant breathing, grounding your body in the present. Watch the panic rise, peak, and fall. This teaches your nervous system what Jung called psychological economy, the ability to conserve energy without collapse. Stage 5. New contracts. Once the old agreements dissolve, new ones must be written. This is where you declare reciprocity as the law of relationship. You might say, if this resets to crisis every week, I will step back for 30 days. Or, I'm here for mutual support, not endless rescue. Some will adapt, others will fall away. Both outcomes are liberation. When you follow these 5 stages, disengagement ceases to be an act of cruelty. It becomes an act of individuation, the moment you stop defining yourself as savior and begin defining yourself as sovereign. But make no mistake, the path is lined with traps. The rescuer, frightened of extinction, will try to sabotage you, which is why we must now prepare for the 4 classic pitfalls that derail the process. Jung knew that the psyche resists change, even when the change is salvation. He warned that every act of withdrawal from unconscious contracts awakens a counterforce, what he called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to turn into their opposite. So as you step out of rescuing, expect the pendulum to swing. These are the 4 classic pitfalls that ambush empaths in the process of liberation. Pitfall 1. Boundary bombing. After a lifetime of yes, the first no often erupts as an explosion. You cut off everyone at once, scorch the field, and then sit in the ashes. While it feels like strength, it is still reactivity. Jung cautioned, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Boundaries must be scaled like weights at a gym, 10% heavier each week, not all at once. The antidote is gradualism. Pitfall 2. Explanation spirals. The rescuer still clings to approval. You say no, but then spend 10 minutes defending it. You reduce your boundary to a debate. Remember, explanation is a form of surrender. Each justification reopens the contract you are trying to close. The antidote is repetition. Say it once. If pressed, repeat it word for word. Silence carries more power than explanation. Pitfall 3. Silent tests. Many empaths retreat into a secret hope. If they cared, they would notice my needs without me speaking. This is the inner child's wish, not the adult's reality. Jung observed that unmet needs ferment into neurosis when unspoken. The antidote is explicit requests. I need support this week. Can you check in on me? If they fail, it is information, not betrayal. Pitfall 4. Spiritual bypass. Perhaps the most seductive trap. You rename exhaustion as service, martyrdom as love. You tell yourself you are transcending ego by giving endlessly. In truth, you are anesthetizing the shadow. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The antidote is the energy audit. Track how you feel after each interaction. If depletion outweighs vitality, stop calling it love. These pitfalls are not failures, they are thresholds. Each time you meet one consciously, the rescuer loses power, and the true self gains ground. But principles are not enough. To see how this looks in life, we must descend into real stories, 2 case studies that reveal what happens when empaths finally rewrite their contracts. Theory alone does not transform. Jung insisted that psychology must always be tested against lived life, against the flesh and blood of human struggle. So let us enter 2 portraits, fictionalized yet drawn faithfully from the archetypal patterns Jung recorded in his Zurich clinic. Case A, Love on the Edge. Clara, 35, an empath in every fiber. Her partner Daniel, a man of constant crises, lost jobs, forgotten bills, mysterious illnesses that always surfaced when responsibility pressed. Clara played nurse, mother, therapist. Each collapse gave her the healer high, proof she mattered. But as Clara began the 5-stage disengagement method, she shifted. Instead of endless availability, she set micro-boundaries. I have 10 minutes now. Instead of rescue, she reflected, I trust you to handle this. Daniel panicked. His crises escalated. But Clara's tolerance grew. She let the anxiety crest, then settle, until the spell broke. Within months, the relationship transformed. Without Clara's constant rescue, Daniel had 2 choices, grow or wither. He chose growth. He found stable work, entered therapy, and began to carry his own weight. Jung would say Clara had stepped out of projection and into individuation, forcing Daniel to confront his own shadow instead of outsourcing it. And if Daniel had chosen collapse, then Clara's liberation would have been the same, proof that her worth did not hinge on another's chaos. Case B, the invisible employee. Mark, 42, the glue of his workplace. He smoothed tensions, fixed colleagues' mistakes, worked late to cover what others neglected. His reward? Occasional praise and chronic exhaustion. Mark's awareness audit revealed the truth. His days were consumed by others' responsibilities, so he applied micro-boundaries, redirecting tasks, time-boxing his help. He upgraded his language. That deadline is yours, not mine. The backlash was immediate. Colleagues bristled. A supervisor accused him of being less of a team player. But something strange happened. Without Mark's silent labor, Incompetence surfaced. The colleague who always deflected was suddenly visible. The supervisor who exploited goodwill was exposed. Instead of collapsing, the system adapted. New structures emerged. Mark's competence was recognized not for rescuing, but for delivering his own work at a higher level. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." Mark's refusal to rescue forced transformation across the entire team. These two lives reveal the law Jung uncovered. When one person rewrites their contract, the entire system must change or fall apart. Liberation is not only personal, it is systemic. And what emerges in the wake of this shift is not collapse, but something startling, the appearance of a deeper, calmer strength, what I call clean strength. And that is where we turn next. The rescuer survives on intoxication. The sovereign empath survives on clarity. This is the passage from what I call the healer high to what Jung would recognize as clean strength. How do you know the shift has occurred? Listen to your body. Before, every yes carried adrenaline, fast speech, tight breath, a racing pulse. You mistook that anxiety for passion. But after the reset, strength feels different, slower, calmer. You pause before replying. You choose silence instead of scrambling for solutions. The nervous system no longer surges with urgency, it rests in discernment. Jung observed that wholeness reveals itself not in noise, but in stillness. In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order. Clean strength is this secret order, where you no longer chase crises because you no longer need the high of being indispensable. Something else changes too. Your attraction pattern. When you lived on the healer high, you unconsciously magnetized chaos, partners, friends, colleagues who thrived on your endless supply. But when you anchor in clean strength, the frequency shifts. Suddenly, the unstable stop orbiting you. Their hooks cannot find purchase. Instead, people of responsibility, integrity, and reciprocity begin to appear. Jung would call this synchronicity, outer events rearranging themselves to mirror inner transformation. Because here is the paradox. The less you seek to be needed, the more authentic connections find you. The moment you stop proving your worth through sacrifice, your presence begins to command respect without effort. But do not be naive. The feeders will not vanish without protest. They will test your resolve with 3 predictable moves, and unless you are ready, you will be pulled back into the contract. So let us now expose these tactics and prepare your counters. The moment you step out of the unconscious contract, expect resistance. Jung warned that the psyche defends its old patterns like a fortress, and feeders, those who relied on your silence, will not surrender easily. Their tactics are predictable. I call them the 3 moves of the feeder. Move 1, the guilt grenade. They will sigh, shake their head, and say, "You're not like you used to be." The insinuation is clear. You were better when you were pliable, weaker, endlessly available. Counter, do not defend. Agree calmly. Correct, I'm practicing sustainability. This reframes change as growth, not betrayal. Move 2, the urgency trap. Suddenly, everything becomes a 5-alarm fire. Emails at midnight, tears at dawn, demands that you drop everything or else. The feeder thrives on your panic. Counter, refuse urgency that is not yours. Say, if it's urgent, it needs a process, not a person. Repeat it. Watch how quickly false emergencies dissolve when you stop funding them with adrenaline. Move 3, the character attack. When guilt and urgency fail, expect venom. You've become selfish. The word selfish here is a weapon, meant to puncture your fragile boundaries and drag you back into sacrifice. Counter, reframe with clarity. Self-respect isn't selfish. It's how I make good choices. Speak it without heat, without defense. The power is in your stillness. Jung noted that projection always escalates before it dissolves. When you refuse to play your old role, the feeder must either adapt or depart. Both outcomes serve your wholeness. And here lies the deeper truth. Every counter you practice is not just a defense against them. It is a training ground for your new identity. Each refusal, each pause, each calm boundary chisels away the rescuer mask and reveals something stronger beneath. That identity is what Jung would call the sovereign empath. Sensitive, but not enslaved. Compassionate, but not consumed. Discerning, but not cold. And now we must explore what this identity actually looks like in daily life. When the rescuer falls away, a new figure emerges, not the hollow addict of the healer high, but what I call the sovereign empath. Jung would recognize this as the fruit of individuation, the union of light and shadow into a self that is both sensitive and unbreakable. The sovereign empath is defined not by availability, but by choice. They still feel everything, every shift in tone, every unspoken need, every flicker of hidden grief, but they no longer rush to absorb. Instead, they ask three anchoring questions. Is this mine to carry? What is my smallest honest no? How do I leave this person with their own power? These questions transform empathy from compulsion into discernment. Jung taught that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. The sovereign empath embodies this integration. They are capable of profound compassion, but they deliver it selectively, strategically, in alignment with inner truth, rather than outer demand. Their presence feels different, too. Manipulators sense it immediately, what Jung called the predator's instinct. Just as a wolf knows when prey is weak, the feeder knows when an empath is unshielded. But before the sovereign, their tactics dissolve. No hooks find purchase, no guilt takes root. They feel exposed, seen through, powerless. Meanwhile, authentic souls are drawn closer. They feel safer, freer, because the sovereign empath's boundaries create a container where real connection can thrive. This is the upgrade: sensitivity without servitude, compassion without collapse, vision without violation. You do not stop being empathic, you stop being exploited. But sovereignty is not a one-time victory. It must be maintained. And Jung, ever the physician of the psyche, knew that maintenance rituals are what prevent relapse. So let us now turn to the practices that keep this new identity alive. Jung knew that breakthroughs without practices collapse back into old patterns. He warned that the psyche, left unattended, slides into repetition compulsions, the unconscious recreating the very suffering you thought you escaped. To remain sovereign, the empath must live by ritual, by a protocol that keeps awareness alive and energy intact. 5 practices form this protocol. Weekly boundary review. Once a week ask, which relationship did I allow to lean too heavily? Choose one and nudge it 10% toward reciprocity. Incremental adjustments prevent relapse into rescuing. Somatic staple. Each morning or evening, practice 5 minutes of exhale-dominant breathing. Jung said, "The body is the psyche's twin. Regulate the body, and you stabilize the soul." Digital hygiene. No instant replies after 9 p.m. delay. Emotionally charged messages by 30 minutes. Urgency is the feeder's hook. Your silence is the solvent. Reflection ritual. Journal with 2 questions. Where did I rescue? Where did I respect? This transforms each day into a mirror of growth. Trusted witness. Maintain one relationship with someone who knows your sovereign self and will remind you when the rescuer mask creeps back on. Jung noted that individuation is not isolation. Community is the crucible for authenticity. These practices are not burdens. They are anchors. They tether the empath to sovereignty the way a keel steadies a ship. Without them, the sea of unconscious contracts will always attempt to pull you back. And yet, even with maintenance, the psyche needs stories, maps of what happens when these lessons are ignored or embraced. So let us conclude by turning to history itself. one figure who collapsed under the rescuer's weight, and another who embodied sovereignty as a beacon. Jung often turned to history and myth to illustrate the archetypes at work in us all. He believed that individuals are not merely themselves, but living vessels for collective patterns. To understand the empath's danger and potential, we must examine two figures, one cautionary, one exemplary. The cautionary figure, Florence Nightingale. She is remembered as the lady with the lamp tending the wounded of the Crimean War. A beacon of service, yes, but also a martyr to her own exhaustion. Her diaries reveal relentless self-denial, a compulsive drive to rescue at the expense of her health. She spent decades bedridden, not because she lacked will, but because her psyche collapsed under the strain of perpetual caregiving. Jung would say she was consumed by her archetype, inflated by the healer persona, until the shadow claimed her vitality. She became a prisoner of the very role that made her famous. The exemplary figure, Eleanor Roosevelt. A woman of profound empathy, yet she did not rescue blindly. She felt the world's wounds deeply, but channeled that energy into structures, human rights commissions, education reforms, institutions that outlived her. She did not collapse under personal crises because she refused to be the endless sponge. Instead, she set boundaries, even in her marriage, and used her sensitivity as vision rather than compulsion. Jung would recognize in her the individuated empath, one who transforms private wounds into collective medicine without dissolving in the process. The contrast is stark. Nightingale burned herself on the altar of service. Roosevelt harnessed her sensitivity into sovereignty and systemic impact. Both were empaths. Only one became sovereign. Jung insisted that history is not memory, but mirror. The cautionary tale warns us of inflation, of losing ourselves in compulsive helping. The exemplary tale reveals what is possible when empathy is integrated with boundaries. And now, with history as witness, we must zoom out even further. For this transformation is not merely personal, it is cultural. The sovereign empath is not just healing themselves, they are carrying the medicine our collective psyche most desperately needs. Jung warned that the world hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. What he meant was this: individual unconsciousness scales upward. The same rescuing contracts that drain empaths in private relationships are replicated in societies, nations, even civilizations. Look around. Entire economies thrive on self-sacrifice, on citizens exhausting themselves for systems that never reciprocate. Corporations demand loyalty while offering burnout. Families repeat patterns of silence and suppression across generations. Nations project their shadow outward, waging wars instead of integrating wounds within. The healer high is not just personal, it is cultural. This is why the sovereign empath matters. Every time one person withdraws from an unconscious contract, a signal ripples into the collective. Boundaries are contagious. Discernment creates what Jung called permission waves, patterns that give others the courage to step out of exploitation. The stakes are enormous. If empaths remain trapped, society continues to feed on its most sensitive souls until they collapse. But if empaths awaken, if they transform from rescuers into sovereigns, they become cultural medicine. They model relationships built on reciprocity, economies built on sustainability, communities built on mutual respect. Jung saw individuation not as private luxury, but as public necessity. The integrated individual, he argued, becomes a node of stability in a chaotic collective. The sovereign empath is precisely such a node. They disrupt cycles of projection and trauma bonding not only in their own lives, but in the unconscious patterns of the culture itself. And so, we return full circle. The danger was never that you felt too much, cared too much, gave too much. The danger was remaining unconscious of why. Which brings us back to the beginning, back to the paradox we opened with. So we arrive at the beginning again, but now with deeper eyes. Remember the paradox I opened with. It wasn't weakness that destroyed you, it was clarity. The danger was never that you loved too much, but that you loved unconsciously, without boundaries, without integration, without awareness of the contracts you were signing in silence. Jung taught that we don't solve our problems, we outgrow them. And this is the final warning to empaths. If you refuse to outgrow the rescuer, you will be devoured by the very people you believe you are saving. But if you choose individuation, if you shift from healer high to clean strength, you will not only free yourself, you will free others by example. Because here's the truth. The danger isn't that you feel too much. The danger is failing to build a conscious relationship with that ability. Your empathy is not a curse. It is raw energy. Used unconsciously, it fuels exploitation. Used consciously, it becomes cultural medicine. Therefore, I leave you with this charge. Identify your type of empathic entanglement. Choose one relationship this week where you will apply a micro-boundary and witness the ripple. Write it, speak it, share it. In doing so, you step into what Jung called the transcendent function, the meeting point where opposites resolve and a new self is born. The world does not need more exhausted healers. The world needs sovereign empaths, sensitive, discerning, unbreakable. Step into that role and become part of what's next.